I never expected that a burst pipe in my neighbor's apartment would change my life, but that's exactly what happened. For months, my life had been a carefully curated collection of quiet routines. I'd wake up, make coffee, sit at my desk overlooking the small, shared courtyard of our apartment building, and work. As a freelance graphic designer, my world was largely confined to the four walls of my apartment and the glowing rectangle of my monitor. It was safe, it was predictable, and it was, if I was being truly honest with myself, profoundly lonely. My name is Miles. At 28, I'd cultivated a life that was stable on the surface but felt like it was built on stilts. I was good at my job, I paid my bills on time, and I kept to myself. My interactions with my neighbors were limited to polite nods at the mailboxes or a held door. It was an existence defined by observation rather than participation. From my second-floor window, I had a perfect view of the comings and goings of the building's other residents, each of them a character in a silent movie only I was watching. And the star of that movie, whether I wanted to admit it or not, was Caleb. He lived in the unit directly below mine. Caleb was the kind of man you noticed. He worked in construction, and most evenings he'd come home in a dusty pickup truck, his work boots leaving faint impressions on the pavement. He was tall, with broad shoulders and arms that showed the satisfying topography of physical labor. His hair was a dark, unruly mess that he was always pushing out of his eyes, and he had a slow, easy smile that he'd give to Mrs. Gable from 3B when he helped carry her groceries. From my vantage point, he seemed like a man completely at ease in his own skin, confident and uncomplicated. I'd watch him in the courtyard on Saturday afternoons, meticulously cleaning his truck or working on some small woodworking project on a portable bench. The scent of sawdust and motor oil would sometimes drift up to my open window, a strangely masculine and grounding smell that felt like it belonged to another world entirely. He was, in my mind, the epitome of a certain kind of man, a kind that wouldn't have the slightest interest in someone like me. He was straight. He had to be. It was a fact I'd cemented in my own mind, a protective barrier to keep my own quiet longing from getting out of hand. So I kept my distance, cataloging these small, mundane details from afar. I knew he drank his coffee black, because I'd seen him on his small patio in the mornings. I knew he was kind, because I'd seen him rescue a scared cat from a tree in the courtyard. I knew he had a laugh that was low and genuine, because I'd heard it echo up through my floorboards on the rare occasions he had friends over. I had constructed a detailed portrait of a man I'd barely spoken to, a man who represented everything I felt I was not: bold, physical, and effortlessly connected to the world. My own life continued in its quiet rhythm. Deadlines were met, projects were completed, and the days bled into one another, marked only by the changing light outside my window. I was neither happy nor unhappy. I was simply existing, floating in a state of benign neutrality. I'd convinced myself this was enough, that this was all I should expect. A life without major risks meant a life without major disappointments. It was a trade-off I had unconsciously made years ago, and one I had, until then, never truly questioned. That's how things were, until a frantic knock shattered the peaceful quiet of a Tuesday evening. I wasn't expecting company. I never was. I paused the music I was listening to and walked to the door, my heart doing a little nervous flutter. Through the peephole, I saw a distorted, wide-eyed version of Caleb. His hair was wet and plastered to his forehead, and his t-shirt was soaked through in dark patches. I opened the door, my carefully constructed wall of anonymity crumbling in an instant. "Hey, Miles, right?" he asked, his voice a little strained. He gestured vaguely down the hallway toward his own apartment. "Sorry to bother you, man. I have a bit of a situation. Is everything okay?" I asked, my voice sounding rusty from disuse. Not really," he said, managing a weak, apologetic smile. A pipe under my kitchen sink decided to recreate the grand finale of the Bellagio fountain show. My entire kitchen is flooded. The building manager is on his way, but it's a mess. He ran a hand through his damp hair, a gesture I recognized from my window but had never seen up close. It was different seeing it from 3 feet away, seeing the genuine stress in his eyes. "Oh wow, I'm so sorry. Do you need a hand with anything?" "Towels," I offered, my brain struggling to catch up with the sudden intrusion of reality into my quiet evening. No, thanks. The maintenance guy is bringing a wet vac. he said, shaking his head. But here's the thing. And this is a huge ask, so feel free to say no. The landlord said the repairs are probably going to take a few days, at least. They need to tear out some drywall and everything. He offered to put me up in a hotel, but with work and everything, it's just a huge pain. He paused, taking a breath. He looked genuinely uncomfortable, which was a state I'd never imagined him in. I was wondering, and again, totally fine if not. If I could maybe crash on your couch for a couple of nights? I'm quiet. I'll be out of your hair, I swear. It would just be so much easier than dealing with a hotel across town. My mind went completely blank. Caleb, here, in my apartment. The silent movie was suddenly in 3D, and the star was asking to come inside. Every cautious, self-protective instinct I had screamed at me to make a polite excuse. It was too much, too close, too disruptive to the fragile peace I'd built. But then I looked at him, really looked at him. He wasn't the confident, almost mythic figure from my observations. He was just a guy with a flooded apartment, looking tired and stressed and vulnerable. And he was asking for help. Yeah, I heard myself say, the word coming out before I'd consciously decided to speak it. Yeah, of course. Don't worry about it. My couch is all yours. The relief that washed over his face was immediate and palpable. Seriously? Oh man, thank you. You're a lifesaver, Miles. I owe you big time, he smiled, a real, genuine smile this time, and the full force of it hit me like a physical blow. It was warmer and more dazzling up close. My carefully ordered world had just been thrown into chaos, and for the first time in a very long time, a terrifying and exhilarating flicker of hope ignited in my chest. The first night was an exercise in carefully managed awkwardness. Caleb went back down to his soggy apartment to grab a duffel bag with a few essentials, his footsteps echoing a new, intrusive rhythm in the building's hallway. While he was gone, I frantically tidied up, plumping the couch cushions, hiding stray design magazines, and wiping down the kitchen counter as if preparing for a formal inspection. I was acutely aware of every detail of my living space, seeing it through his imagined eyes. Was it too sterile? Too nerdy? Did the single succulent on my windowsill scream, "Lonely Plant Dad"? When he returned, he stood in the doorway for a moment, looking around. I held my breath. Wow, you have a really nice place, he said, and the sincerity in his voice made my shoulders relax just a fraction. It's so calm. Calm. That was one word for it. I thought of it more as unlived in, but I just nodded and offered him a weak smile. Thanks. Make yourself at home. Seriously. We ordered a pizza because it felt like the most neutral, non-committal thing to do. We sat at my small dining table, the cardboard box a welcome buffer between us. The conversation was stilted at first, a series of questions and answers that felt like a job interview. He asked about my work, and I tried to explain graphic design without sounding boring. I learned he was a carpenter, specializing in custom cabinetry, which explained the woodworking in the courtyard. It was small talk, the kind you make with strangers, but it was happening in my home, with him. Every small movement he made felt magnified. The way he folded his pizza slice in half, the way he leaned back in his chair, the sound of his laugh when I made a self-deprecating joke about my cooking skills. I was so used to seeing him from a distance that his proximity was almost overwhelming. I could see the faint scar above his eyebrow, the light dusting of freckles across his nose that were invisible from my window. He was real. He was just a person, and that was somehow more terrifying than the idealized version I had created. After we ate, he insisted on cleaning up. I tried to object, telling him he was the guest, but he just waved it off. You're saving me from a hotel, man. The least I can do is wash a few plates. So I stood there, leaning against the counter, while Caleb washed the dishes in my sink. It was a bizarrely domestic scene. The sound of running water, the clink of plates, the comfortable silence that fell between us. He moved with an easy, unthinking competence, and I found myself just watching his hands. They were strong, capable hands, with calloused palms and a few small, faded scars on the knuckles. Hands that built things. It was a stark contrast to my own, which spent their days clicking a mouse and tapping on a keyboard. So, he said, turning off the water and grabbing a towel. Got any bad movies? I feel like this kind of night calls for a really terrible action movie. And just like that, some of the tension broke. We spent the next 2 hours on the couch, my couch, which was soon to be his bed, watching some brainless film about explosions and car chases. We didn't talk much, but we didn't need to. We just sat, a few feet apart, sharing the experience. I was acutely aware of his presence beside me, the warmth radiating from him, the subtle scent of his soap, and something uniquely him, something clean and outdoorsy. For the first time, my apartment didn't feel like a sterile box. It felt like a home. It felt shared. The next day, a new, tentative routine began to form. I tried to work, but my focus was shot. Every creak of the floorboards, every time he cleared his throat from the living room, I was pulled out of my design and back into the reality of his presence. He was remarkably considerate, staying quiet while I was on a client call and making himself scarce when I seemed busy. But his being there changed the very air in the apartment. It was charged with a new energy, a low hum of potential that was both thrilling and nerve-wracking. That evening, after he got back from a long day of work and checking on the progress of his apartment's demolition, he looked exhausted. He slumped onto the couch with a deep sigh, dropping his head into his hands. I hesitated for a moment, then walked over. "Long day?" I asked softly. He looked up, a tired but grateful smile on his face. "The longest. They had to take out the whole kitchen floor. It's going to be at least a week, maybe more." "That's rough," I said, meaning it. "Don't worry about staying here. It's no problem at all." "You sure?" he asked, his eyes searching mine. "I feel like I'm invading your space." "I'm sure," I said, and the surprising thing was I was. The disruption I had feared was becoming a comfort. His presence was a welcome anchor in my sea of quiet solitude. Later that night, I was struggling with a logo design for a new client. I'd been staring at the same screen for hours, moving pixels around, getting nowhere. I must have sighed out loud, because Caleb looked up from the book he was reading on the couch. "Everything all right?" he asked. "Yeah, just creative block," I muttered, frustrated. "This design just isn't working." He stood up and walked over to my desk. I tensed up, feeling suddenly exposed, as if he were about to critique a part of my soul. He leaned over my shoulder to look at the screen, and I had to force myself not to stop breathing. He was so close I could feel the warmth from his chest on my back. He smelled faintly of sawdust and clean laundry. He was quiet for a long moment, studying the screen. I expected him to say something polite and meaningless, like, "Looks cool," but he didn't. "What if you," he started, then paused, as if unsure of himself. He pointed a finger at the screen, his nail tracing a line in the air just above the monitor. "What if you shifted the weight of this element down here? Right now, the balance feels a little top-heavy. It's making my eye want to fall off the page." I stared at the screen, then back at him. His suggestion was simple, elegant, and absolutely right. It was the kind of intuitive insight that usually took me hours of tinkering to arrive at. I made the adjustment he suggested, and suddenly, the whole design clicked into place. It worked. "How did you?" I started, turning to look at him. He had already pulled back, a slightly sheepish look on his face. "Sorry," he said quickly. "I shouldn't have. I don't know anything about this stuff." "No, that was brilliant," I said, genuinely amazed. "Where did that come from?" He hesitated, then walked back to the couch and picked up what I had assumed was a book. It wasn't. It was a leather-bound sketchbook. He held it for a moment. Then, with a hint of reluctance, he handed it to me. I draw a little." I opened the sketchbook with a sense of reverence. It wasn't just a little drawing. The pages were filled with the most incredible sketches I had ever seen. There were stunningly detailed architectural renderings of buildings and bridges, their lines precise and perfect. There were landscapes that captured the feeling of light and shadow so beautifully it took my breath away. And tucked in the back, there were portraits, quick, charcoal studies of people on the street, capturing their character in just a few deft strokes. This was the hidden part of him, the part that existed beyond the work boots and the pickup truck. He wasn't just a carpenter who built things with his hands. He was an artist, a true artist. He had a sensitivity and an eye for balance and beauty that rivaled any professional designer I knew. This revelation struck me with the force of a physical blow. The simple, uncomplicated man I had invented was a fiction. The real Caleb was complex, talented, and unexpectedly vulnerable. "Caleb, these are incredible," I whispered, looking up from the pages. "Why didn't you say anything?" He shrugged, shoving his hands in his pockets. He wouldn't meet my eyes. "It's just a hobby. Something I do to unwind." This is more than a hobby, I insisted, my voice full of a conviction that surprised me. This is a gift. He finally looked at me, and in his eyes, I saw a flicker of something I hadn't seen before, a deep-seated insecurity, a fear of being judged. It was the same fear I lived with every single day. In that moment, the last of my preconceived notions about him dissolved completely. He wasn't some unattainable masculine ideal. He was just a person, with hidden depths and secret fears, just like me. And my quiet, hopeless crush bloomed into something deeper, something more terrifyingly real. It was a connection, and it was growing with every shared hour in the quiet calm of my apartment. A few nights later, the air was thick and warm, one of those late summer evenings that refuses to give way to the coolness of autumn. The city hummed with a low, distant energy, but inside my apartment, a different kind of energy was building. We had fallen into a comfortable rhythm, Caleb and I. The initial awkwardness had melted away, replaced by an easy camaraderie that felt both brand new and anciently familiar. We talked for hours, about everything and nothing, his passion for old buildings, my love for classic film, our shared, cynical sense of humor about the world. That night, neither of us could sleep. The heat had settled in the apartment, making the air feel heavy. Around midnight, Caleb pushed himself off the couch. It's boiling in here. You want to go sit on the porch for a bit? Maybe catch a breeze. The porch was really just a small, shared concrete landing outside the main entrance, with a couple of worn wooden chairs that Mrs. Gable maintained. It overlooked the dark, sleeping courtyard. It was our building's unofficial living room. Yeah, okay, I agreed, grateful for the suggestion. We went outside, the night air a marginal improvement over the stuffiness inside. The only light came from a single, dim yellow bulb above the door, casting long, dancing shadows. We sat in the old chairs, their wood groaning under our weight. For a while, we just sat in silence, listening to the chirping of crickets and the far-off sigh of traffic. It was a peaceful silence, not an empty one. It was the kind of quiet you can only share with someone you're truly comfortable with. You know, Caleb said, his voice low and thoughtful, breaking the stillness. I was really terrified to knock on your door that night. I turned to look at him. His face was half hidden in shadow, half illuminated by the golden light. Really? You don't seem like the terrified type. A small, wry smile touched his lips. Everyone's the terrified type about something. I just figured. I don't know. You always seem so focused, so in your own world. I thought for sure you'd tell me to get lost. My heart did a painful little squeeze. Me? I'm the one who's terrified. I thought you were. I don't know. The king of the courtyard, I said, a little joke to cover the raw honesty of the admission. He chuckled, a soft, low sound in the dark. King of the courtyard? Man, most days I'm just trying not to saw my own finger off. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, and looked at me. The playful mood shifted, becoming something more serious, more intense. You're not what I expected, Miles. Neither are you. I replied, my voice barely a whisper. The space between us suddenly felt charged, humming with all the things we weren't saying. My pulse was a frantic drum against my ribs. I could feel his gaze on me, steady and searching. I watched as his eyes dropped from my face to my chest, then back up again. The air grew thick, electric. He didn't say anything else. He just kept looking at me, and the world seemed to slow down, narrowing to the few feet of concrete between our chairs. Then, very slowly, as if testing the water, he reached out. My breath hitched in my throat. I didn't move. I couldn't move. His hand came closer, and for a heart-stopping second, I thought he was going to touch my face or my knee. But he didn't. His fingers, warm and slightly rough with calluses, brushed against the worn cotton of my t-shirt. He hesitated for a fraction of a second, his eyes locked on mine, asking a question without words. I gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. It was all the encouragement he needed. He gently, deliberately, slid his hand under the hem of my shirt. His palm came to rest flat against my stomach. His touch was like a brand, a jolt of heat that shot through my entire body. It wasn't aggressive or demanding. It was tentative, questioning, and impossibly intimate. I could feel the texture of his skin against mine, the solid, grounding warmth of his hand. I closed my eyes for a second, overwhelmed by the sensation. It was the most profound physical contact I had experienced in years. When I opened my eyes, he was smiling. It wasn't his big, easy grin. It was a small, soft, private smile, nervous and hopeful all at once. It crinkled the corners of his eyes and seemed to hold a universe of meaning. He just held his hand there, against my skin, under my shirt, on a porch at midnight, and smiled. And in that moment, the careful, quiet world I had built for myself didn't just crumble. It was obliterated, replaced by the terrifying, beautiful, undeniable reality of his touch. Everything had changed. The walk back upstairs was silent. Not the comfortable silence of before, but a thick, humming quiet, charged with the aftermath of what had happened on the porch. When we reached my apartment door, he finally pulled his hand from under my shirt. The sudden absence of his warmth left my skin feeling cold, exposed. He didn't look at me. He just murmured a quiet, "Good night," and went straight to the couch, pulling the blanket up as if creating a barrier. I mumbled a reply and retreated to my bedroom, closing the door behind me. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I leaned against the door, pressing my forehead to the cool wood, and replayed the moment over and over again. His touch, his smile, the unspoken question in his eyes. What did it mean? What did any of it mean? The next morning, the easy camaraderie was gone, replaced by a palpable, excruciating tension. The air in the apartment was so thick you could have cut it with a knife. I came out of my room to find Caleb already dressed, pouring coffee in the kitchen. He didn't look up when I came in. He just stared down into his mug as if it held the answers to the universe. "Morning," I said, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the silence. "Hey," he replied, his voice flat. He didn't turn around. An invisible wall had sprung up between us overnight. We moved around each other like strangers, carefully avoiding eye contact, our bodies maintaining a strict, unnatural distance. The space that had felt so warm and shared now felt like a minefield. Every potential interaction was fraught with risk. I wanted to say something, to ask him about last night, but the words wouldn't form. Fear had cemented my jaw shut. I spent the day locked in a state of agonizing internal analysis. I sat at my desk, pretending to work, but my mind was a whirlwind. I replayed the porch scene on a loop, dissecting every single detail. The way he looked at me before he reached out, the slight hesitation of his hand, the exact curve of his smile. Was it a moment of genuine connection, a tentative first step towards something more? Or was it a mistake? A weird, heat-of-the-moment impulse that he now deeply regretted. My brain, an expert at self-sabotage, presented me with a dozen horrifying possibilities. Maybe he was just drunk, even though I knew neither of us had been drinking. Maybe it was some strange, misplaced gesture of friendship that I had completely misinterpreted with my own desperate longing. The most terrifying thought was that he had seen the hope in my eyes and was now disgusted, or worse, pitied me. The thought made my stomach clench with shame. Hope and fear waged a brutal war inside me. One moment, I would cling to the memory of the warmth of his hand on my skin, the softness of his smile. It felt real. It felt intentional. In those moments, a fragile optimism would bloom. He felt it too. He has to have felt it. But then fear would counterattack, whispering insidious doubts in my ear. "You're making it all up. You're projecting your own feelings onto him. He's just a nice guy who felt sorry for you, and you've made it weird. Now he can't wait to escape." Every small interaction that day became evidence for the prosecution. When he left to check on his apartment, his "see you later" felt clipped and dismissive. When he came back, he seemed to avoid the living room altogether, spending time on his phone, his shoulders hunched. The open, vulnerable man who had shown me his sketchbook was gone, replaced by a tense, distant stranger who happened to be sleeping on my couch. The silence was a form of torture. I wanted to scream, to just ask him, "What are we doing?" But I was paralyzed by the fear of hearing the answer I dreaded most. Nothing. It was nothing. Can we just forget it happened? The risk of that rejection felt too great to bear. So I said nothing. And he said nothing. We existed in this state of suspended animation, two people in a small space, separated by an ocean of unspoken words. The hope that had ignited on the porch was flickering, threatening to be extinguished by the cold winds of my own anxiety. I didn't know how much more of the silence I could take. The tension stretched for 2 more days. 2 days of polite, meaningless chatter, of carefully avoided glances, of an apartment that felt both too small and too empty at the same time. I was a wreck. I barely ate. I couldn't focus on work, and sleep offered no escape, as my dreams were filled with endless replays of the porch scene, each one ending in a different, more painful rejection. I felt myself retreating back into my shell, the cautious, observant man reasserting control over the hopeful, vulnerable one. It was a defense mechanism, a way to prepare for the inevitable crash. On Thursday evening, Caleb came back from his apartment with a strange look on his face. It wasn't the tense, avoidant look from the past few days. It was something else, something I couldn't quite read. Resignation, maybe. They finished up, he said, his voice quiet. He didn't look at me, but at a spot on the wall just over my shoulder. The floors are in, the drywall is patched. I can move back in tomorrow. This was it. The moment I had been dreading. His escape. The end of this strange, intense chapter. A cold wave of disappointment washed over me, so strong it felt like grief. I had gotten what I'd supposedly wanted, my space, my quiet, my routine back. But all I felt was a hollow ache. "Oh," I said, the single syllable falling flat in the still air. That's great news." I tried to inject some enthusiasm into my voice, but it sounded brittle and false even to my own ears. He finally met my gaze, and his eyes were filled with a turbulent mix of emotions I couldn't decipher. "Yeah, great." He stood there for a long moment, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. The silence stretched, pulling taut between us. I thought he was going to leave it at that, just let the clock run out on our time together. But then he took a deep breath, like a man about to dive into cold water. "Miles," he said, and my name on his lips was suddenly heavy, significant. "Before I go, can we please talk? About the other night." My heart hammered against my ribs. Here it was, the verdict. I braced myself for the apology, the explanation, the gentle letdown. "Okay," I managed to say, my throat tight. He gestured to the 2 chairs at my small dining table. "Can we sit down?" We sat opposite each other, the same table where we had shared that first awkward pizza, what felt like a lifetime ago. He laced his fingers together on the table, staring down at his hands. He looked more nervous than I had ever seen him. "Look," he began, his voice low and strained. "I'm so sorry for how weird I've been the last couple of days. I handled that all wrong. It's fine." I lied automatically, my defense mechanisms on high alert. "No, it's not fine," he insisted, looking up and meeting my eyes. His gaze was intense, unwavering. I freaked out. "What I did on the porch, putting my hand on you like that, it wasn't a mistake. And it wasn't me being drunk or stupid. It was me being an idiot, but it was intentional." He took another shaky breath. "The truth is, Miles, the pipe bursting in my apartment was a real thing. But asking to stay here, with you, that wasn't random." My brain struggled to process his words. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I've been noticing you for months," he confessed, the words tumbling out in a rush now. "At the mailboxes, through your window when you're working. I wanted to talk to you, to get to know you, but I had no idea how. This is new territory for me. I didn't know what to do. So when my kitchen flooded, I saw it as an excuse. A chance to be near you." The room tilted. Every assumption I had made, every fear I had harbored, was being systematically dismantled. He hadn't been pitying me. He had been planning this. "The other night," he continued, his voice softer now, more vulnerable. "I hoped, maybe you felt something too. When I touched you, it felt right. It felt like you understood. But then the next morning, I panicked. I saw the look on your face, and I thought I'd misread everything. I thought I'd crossed a line and completely freaked you out. So I shut down. I'm a coward." He finally looked down at his hands, a deep flush creeping up his neck. "I like you, Miles. A lot. And I'm terrified I just blew my one chance to tell you that." All the air left my lungs in a rush. The fear, the anxiety, the agonizing uncertainty of the past few days evaporated in an instant, replaced by a wave of pure, unadulterated relief that was so powerful it made me feel lightheaded. He wasn't rejecting me. He was just as scared as I was. A laugh escaped my lips. It wasn't a sound of amusement. It was a sound of pure, cathartic release. Caleb looked up, a confused and hurt expression on his face. "I'm sorry," I said, shaking my head and trying to get my voice to work. "I'm not laughing at you. I'm laughing at me. At us." "Caleb, I thought the exact same thing. I thought I had misread everything. I've spent the last 2 days convinced I'd made you uncomfortable and that you couldn't wait to get away from me." Understanding dawned on his face, followed by a slow, spreading smile of his own. "So you're not freaked out?" "No," I said, my own smile finally breaking through. "I'm the opposite of freaked out." I reached across the table and, my hand trembling slightly, I covered his. "I like you too. A lot." The tension that had held us captive finally snapped. He squeezed my hand, his thumb tracing a slow circle on my skin. He stood up, pulling me gently to my feet. He framed my face with his hands, his expression full of a warmth and tenderness that made my knees feel weak. "Can I try something again?" he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "And do it right this time." I just nodded, unable to speak. He leaned in slowly, giving me every chance to pull away. But I didn't. I met him halfway. His lips were soft, hesitant at first, a question. And then, as I responded, as I kissed him back, the hesitation vanished. It became a kiss that was deep and sure and full of all the unspoken longing of the past few months, of the last few days. It was a kiss that tasted like relief and hope and the promise of a beginning. It wasn't on a porch, shrouded in darkness and uncertainty. It was here, in the light of my kitchen, and it was real. In the weeks that followed, Caleb moved back into his newly renovated apartment downstairs, but in reality, he never truly left mine. The invisible wall between our floors dissolved, replaced by a well-trodden path. My quiet, solitary apartment became our shared space. It filled with the sound of his low laugh, the scent of his sawdust-covered clothes dropped by the door, and the sight of his sketchbook left open on my coffee table. We learned each other's rhythms. I learned that he hummed, slightly off-key, when he was concentrating on a drawing. He learned that I needed 2 full cups of coffee before I could form a coherent sentence in the morning. We went on dates to hole-in-the-wall restaurants he knew, and I took him to revival screenings of old black-and-white movies he'd never seen. He'd point out the architectural details of buildings as we walked down the street, and I'd point out the terrible font choices on storefront signs. We fit. His presence didn't just fill my apartment, it filled the empty spaces in my life. The loneliness I had mistaken for comfortable solitude began to fade, replaced by the steady, grounding warmth of his companionship. I found myself becoming bolder, more open, not just with him, but with the world. The cautious observer was slowly learning how to be a participant. He brought out a version of me I didn't know existed, someone less anxious and more present. One cool autumn evening, about a month after that first real kiss, we found ourselves sitting on the porch again. It was our spot now. The night was crisp, and I was leaning against him, his arm wrapped securely around my shoulders. It was a comfortable, familiar silence now, steeped in a shared history. He shifted slightly, and I felt his hand move. He slid it under my t-shirt, his warm palm resting on my stomach, right in the same spot as that first, fateful night. But this time, there was no hesitation, no uncertainty. His touch was confident, loving, and possessive in the best possible way. He leaned down and pressed a soft kiss to the side of my head. "I'm glad my pipe burst," he murmured against my hair. I smiled, tilting my head back to look at him. His face, illuminated by the same dim yellow light, was relaxed and happy. "Me too," I said. "It's the best plumbing disaster I've ever had." He chuckled and kissed me, a slow, easy kiss that felt like coming home. I closed my eyes, thinking about how strange life is. You can spend years building walls to protect yourself, curating a life that feels safe and predictable, only to have it all beautifully demolished by the most unexpected of things. A knock on the door, a shared pizza, a moment of vulnerability. It turns out that the greatest risks aren't in letting people in, but in never giving them the chance. Sometimes, you just have to open the door and see what happens.